everyone, it's now 2025, so a happy new year to everybody. My next video will be about the characters. Since I don't have all of them at level 80, since I haven't played the game very long myself, I will read the lore from the characters that I don't have at 80 from the site, but I will open the characters. I'll do it like type per type, so first will be destruction and then the hunt. I will keep it at those two for this video for now, because as you can see there's quite a few characters in here. Plus a lot of these characters I don't have at 80, so I will need to read the stuff from the site. So as you can see, when you go to the Databank, you go to characters. I'll show you real quick. Databank characters. I only have 44. You click on destruction, you will get a list of all the characters from the type destruction. If I click on Clara, you can see that I haven't even read her character story yet myself. So I have part 1 and part 2 unlocked, but part 3 and part 4 I will need to read from the website. So the character details. A young girl raised by a robot. Her perceptiveness and tenacity are far beyond her years. For Clara, Svarog's logical calculations are the law of the world and her infallible. That is, until she realizes that the results from the calculations don't always necessarily bring joy to everyone. The once shy little girl then decides to cast aside her timidness. This mostly is shown in when Clara finds this robot in one of the side quests. Robot doesn't work properly, but she wants to fix it, even though Svarog's against it. And it's actually a really cute questline. If you come across it, you should definitely play it. The character story for Clara is put in logs made by Svarog himself. Character story part 1 actually goes about when he found her and when he took her in. Character story part 1. A female child discovered in the landfill to the southeast of Boulder Town. Scans show the child has no structural damage or functional issues, but her mental state was relatively unstable. She is resistant to questions about her condition and clearly wanted to avoid the subject. I've continued attempting to communicate with her and successfully obtained some information. The child begins to cry, lasting 3 hours and 7 minutes. The child's name is Clara. Her background is unknown. Conclusion: take her back to base for observations and collect further information to generate a follow-up plan to take care of her. So as you can see, Svarog found her and actually cares for her, takes her back and helps her grow up. Character story part 2. Clara has grown proficient in the Balabok common tongue and displays great talent in the field of mechanical engineering, but she still resists communicating with other humans. Assessment: this tendency is detrimental to Clara's long-term development in Balabok. There is currently an urgent need to develop a suitable socialization and communication program for Clara. Priority: high. The next log. Clara successfully made contact with an individual of similar age in Boulder Town. The individual is named Hook and claims to be the head manager of the local security organization, the Moles. No information about this organization has been found in my database. Clara's contact with Hook didn't go well at first. She displayed considerable shyness, however. Hook managed to keep the conversation going with extreme enthusiasm and empathy, calling Clara an honorary member of the Moles. After contact, Clara described Hook as her first friend. This matter is of tremendous significance to Clara and this log has been tagged important. The next part is sadly unlocked at character level 60. Under Clara's guidance, many vagrants have established settlements around the periphery of the base and rely on Clara to survive. This behavior does not contravene the orders of preservation. However, many of them are trying to enter the other world via this base's transport passage. The gates of the base must be sealed tightly to avoid accelerating the demise of Balabok. Clara has discussed this with me before. She believes locking the gates is an incomprehensible act. I responded with my predicted calculations. By overcommitting her resources to the war against the Fragmentum, the Supreme Guardian is accelerating the destruction of the overworld. Isolation would be the best option for the people of the underworld. This would buy them more time to try and survive. In the end, Clara finally agreed. Most humans behave illogically, but Clara doesn't. She's raised by me and grew up amongst automatons. and her behavior is very based on pure rationality. Her presence may impact predicted calculations of Belobog's demise, but more observations are required. Part 4 itself, unlocked at level 80. Ever since I was created, I've been given a command to preserve the underworld, even if I can only preserve it for a millisecond longer than the overworld. I will still carry out these orders. To borrow a phrase from traditional Belobog culture, perhaps it could be put like this: I am faithful without hesitation to the mission I've been given. Therefore, I see my calculations as immutable laws. Nobody and nothing can ever shake me, including any outsiders. However, I found this possible permutation among the calculation results. In his calculation, Clara completely changed Belobog. I once said of her behavior is more based on pure rationality. If we take this probable result as a base and revisit my conclusions, I cannot view it as an error, but I admit that it is biased. With the results of this calculation, Clara has only proven one thing. Having true rationality is not the key to changing the status quo, but rather that her sincere and passionate emotion overturned all calculations and completely reversed Belobog's doomed fate. However, unless new external forces intervene, the probability of this is less than 0.25272%, which places it in the low probability category. Further research on these calculations are paused. Today, the probability of survival in the underworld has not seen a significant upward trend over the last 5 cycles. This means that implementation of this may be suspended, but I will still monitor all relevant risk factors. During this cycle, I will focus on finding Clara's family. Despite Clara insisting that she has already found her real family, I will keep collecting any and all information to track down Clara's real family as soon as I can. So, even though he's a robot, I think he does actually really care about Clara the character. Next, Blade. The character introduction: a member of Stellaron Hunters and a swordsman who abandoned his body to become a blade. Pledges loyalty to Destiny's slave and possesses a terrifying self-healing ability. So, as you can see, story. Character details. Birth name unknown. He pledges loyalty to Destiny's slave and possesses a terrifying self-healing ability. Blade wields an ancient sword riddled with cracks, just like his body and his mind. Character story part 1. The only thing he could sense was a splotch of crimson in his sight and the taste of iron in his mouth. His limbs were unresponsive. He must have died. Do you remember? He opened his mouth, lost. His voice as coarse as a savage beast. The sound from his throat stopped abruptly as the cold hard object penetrated his torso, again and again, this repeated for thousands of times. How marvelous when his muscles fibers tore open, he could hear the tiny sounds of tendons bridging and reconnecting. How marvelous, the monster in his body was being nourished, but he would let it grow into a massive beast. How marvelous, he had already lost all will to live, but his body regenerated without any consideration for his preferences. How marvelous. Before the sword pierced his body once more, he grabbed it with his bare hands and slowly stood up. Do you remember now? He met the woman's blood-red eyes, his mind still empty. He was run through by the sword once again. Remember the feeling of death and bring it to them. Crimson resurfaced in his vision. He stared at the sword that killed him. The blade was broken in half and lying on the ground. Rise and let me kill you once more. A lot darker than the Clara story, if you hadn't noticed yet. Character story part 2. The only thing he could sense was a splotch of crimson in his sight and a taste of iron in his mouth. His limbs were unresponsive. He must have died. The black-haired young man shivered violently all over, but still clutched onto the spear in his hands. He had no dragon horns, and his reaction was slightly less mature than he remembered, but he would never forget this spear, these eyes, and how cruelty burst out from beneath the mirror-like emerald calmness. His wounds began to heal. His irises flickered and fixed their gaze at the boy once more. Without hesitation, the boy made another flourish with the spear. That's it. The one who showed no mercy to enemies was you. The one who single-handedly buried the beloved was you. The one who also almost led the place called home to its destruction was also you. He fell down again. The teen pressed his hand against his own wounds and retreated until he was no longer in the man's sight. Before I witness your death in person, we will meet again. Blank. The person, the boy with the spear, clearly remembers who Blade is and his real name, that's why it's probably blanked out. Character Story Part 3. The only thing he could sense was a splotch of crimson in his sight and the taste of iron in his mouth. His limbs were unresponsive. He must have died. The monster swallowed him again, but this time his enemy is not another person. The imposing armor stayed quiet. He was grappled and imprisoned with those pairs of arms. The speaker was the woman with sunglasses. Listen, I can always kill you again, otherwise I can't bring you back. Her voice was very gentle, and even the monster inside his body stayed silent to listen to her. But I don't want to. The woman leaned down and whispered in his ear. It was a deal he couldn't refuse. What do you people want? Is there anything more satisfying than seeing how the undying die? That's what he said. The giant armor loosened his arms. Destiny was ahead, and he will be leaving with them. Listen, Blady, loosen up. Listen, don't think about anything at all. He nodded. The woman walked to his side, smiling, yet he thought her smile looked very sad. Maybe someone left her before they could listen to everything she had to say, he thought. He could no longer see anything. He remembered that, decades ago, he came to the Zhenzo with a merchant vessel and was impressed by the superb craftsmanship of this place. The young man was obsessed to the point of forgetting to eat or drink and spent his inspiration like he was running out of time. He forged hundreds of marvels, 4 of which were the most famous. The sword, named Short Sword, was flawless in its make. Its inky body glimmered with a sheen of sanguine. Only the strongest swordsmaster in the Zhenzo could demonstrate the true meaning of this blade. The Foxian girl once loosened 3 arrows simultaneously with her recurve bow in a dire situation, while still continuing to navigate the star skiff and laughing with the others. The black-haired man with dragon horns used his water manipulation abilities to rejuvenate his allies, and in the next moment he bound the water upon his spear and used it to run his enemies through. There was also the boy who kept bickering with him, yet the moment the youth saw the devastator glaive, he grabbed it and never wished to part with it. Now, Blank had died. His first and only death. However, he was still here, his youth-like brain churning and thinking for all eternity. He thought about his hands that were no longer dexterous, the hands that could no longer forge another weapon. But none of this mattered to him. From this moment on, that body will be the one and only blade. Next person, Dan Heng. So, Dan Heng, Imbibitor Lunae. He is evolution down the main storyline. So if you haven't done like the full story thing yet, I would recommend you do that before listening to this part. You can always skip for like a couple of minutes as well and just skip this and come back to it later. Dan Heng, Imbibitor Lunae. Character introduction. Dan Heng's true form from his Vidyadhara lineage carries the residual power left behind by his past incarnation, the Imbibitor Lunae. Upon accepting the majestic horns atop his crown, he must accept all the merits and faults attributed to that sinner. His true Vidyadhara form revealed after accepting the residual powers from the previous reincarnation of Imbibitor Lunae. Upon accepting the majestic horned crown atop his forehead, he must accept all the merits and faults attributed to that person. However, he was never himself. In the dim abyss, devoid of light, he seemed to have returned to the insides of the Vajra egg, being ceaselessly churned in tumultuous waves and elusive dreams. He dreamed he was standing before a sacrificial altar, dancing and chanting. However, the songs and gestures were mere facades. The light emanating from his eyes and the storm roiling in his blood were the true forces at play. Casually, he wove the misty and foggy tide in Scale Gorge, waterscape, sealing the maddened and frenzied dragon into the propagating giant tree. As the echoing roar streamed up into the heavens and dissipated, Scale Gorge waterscape will continue its peace for centuries more, and his duty was over. The ceremony ended, and he turned to look behind him. In the blink of an eye, the stairs he had stepped down from had become full of standing dignitaries with draconic horns and dressed like royalty, as if they were mirages in a mirror. Each of them turned, and their sleeves swirled with emotion, ready to leave one after another in a meticulously calculated arrangement. Innumerable, they formed a staircase to the sky, stretching into the never-ending spatial void. The faces of all these people would greet him every morning in his dressing mirror. That was his face. No, it was the face of the primordial, the original, the very first High Elder. He smiled bitterly and covered his face with his palm as if ascertaining whether he could tear off his mask and return it to its true owner. He could not. In the dim abyss, devoid of light, he seemed to have returned to the insides of a Vijara egg, being ceaselessly churned in tumultuous waves and elusive dreams. He dreamed he arrived at the battlefield like the descent of a god. He hovered with the clouds. The military formations below him were tiny as ants, and the airborne chariots and starskiffs were moths destined to die in a flame. Such were the lives of mortals. Was this the viewpoint of a dragon? A sliver of hubris rose up and plunged his heart into emotionless and icy detachment, and he hurriedly cast his gaze toward those with whom he had fought and shared liquor. The pilot who soon passed did not care whether the formation was orderly. She shot at will, letting the arrows filling with blazing fire fall on the storming Borusan foot soldiers. Along the direction pointed out by the starskiffs, a white-haired swordswoman spearheaded into the fray ahead of the entire army. Dancing with her sharp blade, she dashed between flashes of metallic light, her actions too sharp to even let her allies come near, reducing them to merely supporting her from behind. On the other hand, the Cloud Knight lieutenant who used to chat and laugh with the dragon contained his languid indolence. Holding his devastating glaive in hand as he stood with his men to repel the Borusan paws attacking from the battlefield's wings. And behind the main host, the military engineers who marched with the army were adjusting and testing giant automatons. Perhaps that exceedingly arrogant craftsman was now working at full speed, for these machines, hundreds of feet tall, are specialized weapons designed to counter the mecha beasts. Then he saw the general of yesteryear, Teng Zhao. He was enveloped in golden lightning like the avatar of the rainbow, plowing through the enemy's rows of war beasts with his divine mirage. The devastated Borusan began to flee, and he knew it was time to carry out the duty entrusted to him, so he let go, letting his consciousness disappear in storms and hails, letting thunder roar from him, letting tsunamis rage from him. He floated on top of clouds, watching the enemies getting swallowed by the watery abyss and watching the land behind him. Many humans, Vijayadhara, and the Phoxians were eternally left there, unable to lay their eyes upon their home ever again. The dragon heart told him that it was but a small speck of dust brushed away from the world. Wars come with a price, but life will always thrive once more. The Vijayadhara are not the only branch of long scions. However, his human heart ached for those comrades who, like him, had warm flesh and blood, and for those mortals who might have lived longer, but now could return home nevermore. Part 3. Unlocked at level 60. I don't have him leveled up very much because there were other characters that I was prioritizing. In the dim abyss, devoid of light, he seemed to have returned to the insides of a Vijayadhara egg, being ceaselessly churned in tumultuous waves and elusive dreams. He dreamed that he parted the ocean's waters and came to the palace's ruined depths, burying the remnants of his old friend's hallowed blood, or creating a new life that had not been seen for millennia. Or perhaps those two actions were one and the same, an unattainable desire that could not be carried out for long years in the past, a final straw that broke the gargantuan dragon's back. The craftsman was covered in blood and wounds as he guarded the dragon with a sword in his hand. He urged himself to commit to the decision. Shuhu is dead. We won. But how many more victories can we manage to achieve? How many more prices like this must we pay? Look, the ambrosial arbor still stands. So long as it is alive, the monsters, they can come back again and again. The war of the Shanzhou natives, Phoxians, and Vijayadhara against the abominations will never end. Yes, none of us are special. Each of us have only one life, sacrificing for this, dying for that. It's all our own choices, just like how she chose to save you and Young Liu. Just like how she chose to let more people live on. War and the lives that expired in the war were living beings just like him. He shut his eyes warily, remembering their faces, and made up his mind. If there's a chance, we will also choose to let her and more people live on. We, the Vijayadhara, have our own way of salvation. I can give it a try. Like an out-of-body experience, like a dream within a dream, he returned to the moment before his sense of self disappeared. With a cold and emotionless mind, he observed himself from turning into a dragon, entangled and fighting claw and fang against that bulb of shape-shifting shadow of flesh and blood. In an illusion seen on the verge of death, the emissary of the gods showed him an unsettling, beautiful scene. The stars pulsated and sang hymns like red blood cells, and the universe descended into an abyss of flesh and desires. The dragon heart beat to its limit, raising its fangs, breath, and fury. However, no matter how mighty it was, a life form cannot defy the true body of a god of life's envoy. Until a star skiff ran everything through like an arrow shaft, he saw that girl crawling out of the ruins with great difficulty, lifting a sun of absolute darkness in her hand. In that fleeting eternity, he saw her hand disappear, saw her face disappear, and saw her disappear. That item had grounded everything around it into the finest dust and dragged them into the vortex of raw power, including that girl. A tuft of hair and a few drops of blood fell to the floor as evidence of her existence. Those were the only traces she left. Part 4 from level 80. In the dim abyss, devoid of light, he seemed to have returned to the insides of a Vijayadhara egg, being seamlessly churned in tumultuous waves and elusive dreams. He dreamed of the Draco Catena nails being staked into his body, and chains of corallium winding around him to hang him in mid-air in the shackling prison. He dreamed the elders coming and going to interrogate him about the truth of the Arcanum and the whereabouts of the dragon herd. He did not speak. He dreamed of the judges coming before him to read their decision and wanting to sentence him to death. He did not speak. He dreamed of the white-haired Cloud Knight lieutenant coming to visit him and bringing him news of the lieutenant's negotiations. The Vijayadhara did not permit him to die, nor did they permit him to leave. He did not speak. He dreamed he was raising his cup to drink with the others again, that he molted off his scales and that he returned to the egg and became someone else. He dreamed many things, like a never-ending immersia entitled Self. Following the immersia was an ever clearer but unreachable illusion. He saw himself being exiled. He saw himself boarding an express. He saw himself running into the endless stars, never looking back. Another sad story. The thing is, the Dan Heng character is linked to another character also called Dan Heng. This version is the Imbibitor Lunae, which means that you have Dan Heng who you meet on the Express, and this is the evolved version of him when you continue the main story quest for the Janzo area. We already are at like 23 minutes after only 3 characters, so imagine how much information there is inside of these. Like, a lot of them have very long storylines, like actual long things to read. As you can hear, my voice is already a little bit gone, been a bit ill over the last couple of days, so I'm gonna cut it here. I will try and do the 3 next characters, if not 4, the next day, so be sure to leave a like. It does help me a lot. It makes other people notice these videos as well if you like them. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments as well. If you have anything that you think might be interesting for me to play through and collect the texts for and then read those texts to you guys, please let me know. I'm also in the background playing Inquisition, trying to collect as much information in that game as possible. Some people might actually be interested because honestly, the Dragon Age series is a really good game. I'm a little bit disappointed at Inquisition, and I have not played the next game yet, Veilguard. I heard bad things about it though, sadly, but I guess when I play it myself I will see how I feel about it. But either way, thank you for being here. Have a nice evening, guys. I hope you guys have a nice new year. Be sure to do your best this year as well, like you did last year, and I'll see you guys next week.